they all agreed it was a very special day, putting a wreath at the grave of Elizabeth Farrell, and then a wreath in honour of all the women of Ireland. And what I want to do today is kind of set the scene of Cumann in 1914, and then more specifically talk about North Kerry and the people in Cumann. And you will notice when I'm talking about them, I have a concentration in certain areas at the moment. I won't mention where until we get there, but you can guess. Because I've only just started the research into Cumann in North Kerry, because we didn't know about it, there were no documents, but there are some coming online. So just to talk about the formation of Cumann in 1914, it happened on the 2nd of April 1914. A meeting was held in Wynn's Hotel in Dublin, and this was to announce the formation of this new organisation, Cumann. And it came out of the formation of the Irish Volunteers in November of 1913, and then women and nationalist women looking for some part to play in nationalism in Ireland. But there were also women who'd been active in cultural nationalism. They'd been in Ineen Nairn with McMahon. They'd been involved in the Irish Women's Franchise League campaigning for the women's vote with Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, and they wanted to continue those roles. So there were women like Jenny Wise-Power, this woman here, a woman who had been active campaigner since she'd been involved in the Ladies' Land League with Anna Parnell in 1880. So these weren't women who were coming out in anger, they were women with political ideology. And they called a meeting because the volunteers didn't seem to be, while they agreed there was a role for women in the national project, they weren't really inclined to let women join the Irish Volunteers. So who came to Wynn's Hotel? It's worth noting the names and the backgrounds of these women and acknowledging their places in history, because this is what I'm beginning to do now with the release of the pension files, naming the women who were in Cumann, because I don't think we've named them in the same way we've named the Irish men who participated in the nationalist project. They were serious political women like Jenny Wise-Power, like Louise Gavin Duffy, and tangential Ballylongford connection, Nancy O'Rahilly, the wife of O'Rahilly, who was of course born in Ballylongford. This was Nancy Brown, originally an American born in Philadelphia, but by 1914 a fully committed woman to Irish nationalism, as was her husband, and herself she was also a suffrage activist. She's later vice president of Cumann in 1917 and on the provisional committee in 1920 to 21, and in the Civil War she was arrested as an anti-treaty activist in 1922 with Sheila Humphreys, who of course was the niece of the O'Rahilly. So you can see there's already North Kerry connections even in that first meeting in the 2nd of April 1914. But the person they elect to deliver the inaugural speech and to preside over Cumann is this woman, Agnes O'Farrelly, a noted Gaelic scholar and lecturer in modern Irish in UCD, one of the most prominent women in the Gaelic League at the time, a noted Redmondite, a supporter of the Irish Parliamentary Party. She was a close friend of Roger Casement actually, and after his arrest in Kerry and then his trial in London, she did campaign unsuccessfully to have his death penalty reprieved. She was chosen really to be the inaugural person at the Cumann meeting because she is a kind of compromise character between the more moderate nationalists and the radical Republicans, I suppose we would call them. So she gives some sort of the plaque we put up in Wynn's Hotel on the 3rd of April this year, and I think it was correcting a historical injustice in that there had been a plaque to the Irish Volunteers for the last 30 years in Wynn's Hotel, because they had met in the Wynn's Hotel as well. So we, the Women's History Association of Ireland and Wynn's Hotel, made sure that the plaque went up this year to commemorate Cumann. So as you can see, we put on their aims on the bottom of the plaque: to advance the cause of Irish liberty, to organise Irish women in the furtherance of that objective, to assist in arming and equipping a body of Irish men for the defence of Ireland, to form a fund to contribute to that defence, and other activities would be first aid drills, signalling and rifle practice. O'Farrelly delivered the first speech, and she did talk about women working in conjunction with the Irish Volunteers. She emphasised the auxiliary nature of Cumann, and this is going to be a big problem with some of the women in Cumann. calling themselves auxiliaries of the Irish Volunteers. Many of the Cumann members who were suffrage activists, had been campaigning for the vote for women for a very long time, resented the idea that they were handmaidens to the volunteers, or auxiliaries to the volunteers. And this is what the Irish Citizen, the suffrage newspaper founded by Francis G. Skeffington and Hannah, his wife, who were long-time campaigners, said that this was a thoroughly reactionary thing. Cumann offer homage to men. Their first duty is to give allegiance and support to the men. These are the kind of phrases that are scattered through it and give its keynote. We are satisfied that this movement, like the movement of the Ulster Unionist women, and 250,000 Ulster Union women had signed the Solemn League and Covenant in 1912. So the Unionist women were also seen as reactionary and auxiliaries. They saw it as a thoroughly reactionary one and opposed to the best interests of Ireland. So it's interesting that women activists saw Cumann in the beginning as something they really didn't want to get involved with. The numbers go up and then they go down a little bit, but then they surge again. And these were numbers we got before the recent release of the pension file, so I think the numbers are an underestimate of how many were there. Beginning in 1915, Cumann takes root in Tralee. On the 25th of March of that year, a meeting in the Rink, organised by Miss McCarthy, who was a national organiser for the organisation, outlined the ways Cumann could aid the volunteers, and she enrolled over 60 women in Cumann on that day. On Easter Sunday 1916, Tralee Cumann, with the Irish Volunteers, assembled for revolution. But however, they did receive the countermand from McMahon and went home. However, the women were soon involved again, as were Cumann, in nationwide in keeping the Republican cause alive. In Kerry, the women in 1917 participated in the anti-conscription campaign, and as the Anglo-Irish War flamed into violence, Cumann grew and expanded in Kerry. In the beginning, up to 1919, it's mostly in Tralee and Killarney and the bigger towns. But after 1919, you find it in every townland outside of all those towns. So you get an idea of what is happening in Cumann. By 1920, there's branches all over North Kerry with women flocking to the banner. Their work is vital to the campaign. The men were on the run, so the women provided the logistics of the military campaign. They were the eyes and ears of the Irish Volunteers IRA. They did all the intelligence work, which was very dangerous work, as well as carrying of messages and dispatches from one company to another. Without these dispatch carriers, the planning of the operation would have been next to impossible. They also carried arms, munitions, bombs and other armaments to volunteer companies, to ambushes and planned operations. So they would cycle up with a bomb in the basket of the bike and hand it over to the volunteer company who would set it. So they were pretty much on the front line of the military action as well. They were also the minders of arms dumps and the keepers of safe houses. They helped run the Dáil courts and the local authorities once the British authorities had given up on that. And they produced the militant nationalist newspaper, the Irish Bulletin. They also had to arrange to collect the recovery of bodies of volunteers who were killed. Sometimes those bodies would be bodies of family members. For example, Jeremiah Lyons, who was shot in Gartha Glanna, was possibly collected by his sister Babe Lyons, who was a member of the Irish Cumann in Dwall, and bring back those bodies and prepare them for burial. They also remain on the front line. They don't go on the run. They're the ones who experience the direct violence visited on them in their homes and their communities. They were there when the Black and Tans attacked and burnt the communities in Listowel, Dubbo, Ballylongford and elsewhere in Kerry. And this American Commission on Conditions in Ireland, published in 1920, recorded almost 50,000 British Army raids on private homes. And that is an awful lot of raids where Cumann women were in those homes. And this is evidence given on the raid, one of the raids in Ballylongford. And it talks about the Black and Tans went from the barracks to the church in the village about 7 o'clock in the evening, where 200 or 300 residents were at evening devotion. The Black and Tans stationed themselves at the gate of the church with batons and beat the people as they came through the gate. There were many women and children beaten upon that night. The two Black and Tans who perpetuated this outrage boasted about it in the barracks, but no official investigation was ever made, and they were not reprimanded. by their superior officers. So you can see that the frustration that the Bacantans have at